All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. So it's a little hectic. As you obviously, most of you know, there's a giant GCP outage right now, so both of my startups are not working. So it was a little chaotic getting started, but hopefully we'll kick this event off. So for those of you who don't know, a group of about 12 of us went down to the AI Engineer World's Fair in San Francisco last year. This has been going on for a couple of years now. Every 6 months they have a small one and then they have a big one. We went to the big one. There were about 3,000 builders there, representing probably what we would consider like the top of the cream of the crop in terms of engineers and kind of like what's happening on the bleeding edge. Special shout out to Patrick he's basically attended a few of these already and basically said, hey, we should all go down and do this together. So half the fun was just going to this awesome conference, and we learned a lot, and we're going to try to share like all the learnings from this past week with you today. There was already, I think, people have been sharing online, but we're going to go in much more depth today, and some of the folks have presented some slides. But before we get into that, I just wanted to share some photos because I thought this would be a fun place to start. So basically, we all stayed in a 10-person house. It was a huge house. It had 10 queen beds in it. And we had this backyard where we would hang out at the end of the night and just talk and kind of recap. And some of the best insights that ended up going into Patrick's article were kind of just happening around this environment where we're just hanging out and talking. And the reason why I wanted to start here is because this is just like such an important part to kind of, being a successful founder. It's not just building a good business, it's being able to interact with everyone else and staying up to date. And that's kind of the whole point of Foundations of what we're trying to share with you guys today as well. But it's just a lot of fun. And so I think we had so much fun that we want to do this again. We're thinking about maybe doing some retreats somewhere in Seattle where we can just kind of deep dive, bring each other up to speed on everything that's happening. And yeah, so that was the event organizer right there. And yeah, so there's Greg Brockman. And I don't know if you can see this here, but one of our companies, they got their logo, like Tambo right here, was like in the close-up like most of the time. It was pretty hilarious. So Michael, good job. I don't know how you managed to swing that. Okay, so we've got a lot of presenters, and we're going to do 5 minutes each presenter. So presenters, Ryan will point at you when your time is up, and hopefully, if we get through everyone, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. All right. So I'm going to start, and then we're going to pass it off to Ryan. All right. Share presentation. Done. Oh, wait, there we go. I'm a bad multitasker. Okay, and if you are next, please put this microphone on so we can record you. So Ryan, put that on. And then I'll pass this to the next speaker. All right, cool. So each of us kind of has a different theme to talk about, and my theme was tiny teams. So this was a track, basically, at the conference, and basically what this covered is with AI and all the leverage that that brings to a startup, there's a new way of building a business, and it involves much less people moving much faster. And so I attended a talk that was presented by Max, who's the founder of Gumloop. They're a workflow automation platform. They're a competitor to N8N, and they just raised $17 million without asking for it. And Max's whole thing is he wants to get to $1 billion with 10 people. So he basically gave a presentation on how he moves fast and beats the competition. And then I also got lunch with him because he's a friend of mine. And he kind of gave a little more information that I wanted to share about this too. But I think I could just boil it down into 3 core points. First, only hire exceptional people. So basically, the more people you add to your team, the slower your team goes because of how much communication needs to happen. So less people, just by nature of how this works, means your company will go faster, which means that hiring the best people is really important now. All of us want to hire the best people, but the reality is that most of us can't because it's just hard, right? So how do you actually do that? Well, basically, you need to generate momentum for your startup and make it obvious to them why they should join your startup. And so there's a kind of a formula that I think I would generally say, like, old startups start by raising and then hiring and then finding PMF/momentum. You kind of need to do momentum first now, because if you do that first, then hiring is going to be a lot easier, and so is raising, which I spelled wrong. That must have been like right when the Google outage hit. Yeah, raise the ground. But you know, like there's a lot of startups for people to choose from. There's a weird phenomenon happening where hiring there's a lot of candidates, but no one's picking them right now because everyone wants this dream candidates. So if you can just figure out how to generate momentum first, it's just going to make your life a lot easier down the road. You know, Max did that definitely, and that's definitely a trend we're seeing. There was a debate, I think, last year about in-person versus async. I think roughly that debate has gone away. Everyone's just saying, like obviously, if you want to move as fast as possible, you should probably be in person, and that's not really a discussion anymore. So everyone's just basically working in person now. So that was another really interesting trend. How much time do I have, Ryan? Okay, great. So I wanted to quickly touch on, we had a really interesting Seattle versus San Francisco debate as well, and I think some Art's going to touch on this, so I just wanted to kind of connect what I was saying earlier about Seattle versus SF. So, you know, given that this is the new formula, what does that mean for like being in Seattle based in SF? And again, I just wanted to kind of share 3 quick points on this. So first of all, your customers don't care where you're based, right? Like, they don't care if you're in Seattle or SF or Milwaukee or wherever. So really, the point I want to make here is like, it's really just about what advantages and disadvantages do you have as a startup being in Seattle. I think you should look at that through 2 of the most important aspects. One is being able to hire good talent in person. And secondly, it's just kind of the serendipity factor, which is hard to kind of explain. But basically, because of all the new techniques that are literally coming out every single week and day, for example, a lot of us just in the last couple of weeks have adopted Claude Code and have now gone from like working with agents directly to managing them and kicking off like agents working in parallel. I mean, this is literally 5x or 10x, maybe even 100x our token usage, and hopefully productivity as well. But like, just imagine trying to stay on top of things without having a really strong community. So these are the 3 things I think you can compare Seattle versus SF on. And you know, I think Art will cover more of like how they compare across these 3 topics as well as others. But just keep that in the back of the mind. Like, if you can kind of achieve these in Seattle, then I think you have a really good shot. And again, everything's hyper competitive. You've heard this before, but the only moat right now is execution if you're building an AI startup. I think there's definitely still exceptions. There's all kinds of other companies you can create. But if you're like building a venture-backed company, like execution is the moat right now. Okay, I think I'm at my time, so I'm going to pass it off to Ryan. Oh, we're all on the same.
Disconnect your mic. Your mic. Disconnect that. Yeah. I think it's easier to pass over the mic, honestly. I think it's too much inside. It's gonna be on all the time.
Hi guys. So my takeaways are a little random, but just a little bit of context. We're building AI agents at Breadcrumbs, so most of my takeaways are around that area. So the first thing that I noticed at the conference is very, very technical, which is what I like. But it's not research technical, but very practical as well. Everybody's there is an AI practitioner of some kind, AI engineer building AI products. So a couple of cool things that I learned at the conference. The first thing is LLM power ranking. Probably a lot of people are wondering which LLMs should I choose. There's so many of them now. And there's a really entertaining talk by Simon Wilson, who's a co-creator of the Django web framework. And he came up with this pelican on a bicycle benchmark. So the idea is you ask an LLM to generate a pelican riding a bicycle, but it's not an image generator, it's a text generator. The LLM is supposed to generate SVG, so like everything is textual, right? So it has to be spatially aware enough to write SVG code, and not just generate an image. So based on the Pelican index, Gemini 2.5 is completely unmatched He compares every single LLM against each other, and Gemini 2.5 has a 100% win rate, which is really amazing. And then the folks at Artificial Analysis, they ran really deep benchmark on every single LLM based on intelligence, speed, and price. Intelligence is not the only thing you should care about when building on top of LLMs. Speed and price do matter as well. And again, Gemini knocking it out of the park in terms of intelligence is one of the most intelligent LLMs, one of the faster LLMs, and is really cheap. So if you're not building on Gemini, you should start building it now. Except that GCP is under a huge outage right now. That aside, and then one of what I was looking forward to in the conference was learning more about how people build reliable agents. We've been building agents for a long time, and we ran into all sorts of reliability with building them. According to the survey that they sent out before the conference, agent reliability was top of mind for a lot of AI practitioners out there. But the talks are mostly around three main topics, and they are relatively disappointing, I would say. So evals, I think Pesh is going to talk a lot more about evals, but my key takeaway is please use brain trust. They're the only company that has like 2 keynotes, I think, in the conference. They probably paid a lot of money for it. The product looks pretty cool, so I'm going to check it out. And then there's a new movement in building agentic workflows and agentic products called micro agents. So breaking down smarter, bigger agents into smaller agents that can be stitched together using code in the workflow. It's more predictable. I've been preaching this within our community a little bit. It's good to hear that a lot of people are thinking along the same line as well. And then just security is becoming top of mind as well when you're building, and these agents are working in the wild through MCP servers and tool calls and whatnot. There are a lot of disruptive things that these agents can do, like transferring your money from your bank account to another bank account, things like that. So it's becoming top of mind for people at the conference, and it's going to be even more prominent going forward. There are a little bit of chatter around AI startups. This is more of a technical conference, but obviously VCs have to be involved too. And then I think my key takeaways are building products and tech generally are not considered the moat anymore because everything is changing so fast, everything is moving so quickly in the industry. So execution is a moat. Tyler mentioned that. And then also design is a moat, probably. Take whatever you want to get away from that. Some randomly cool stuff that I came across. Waymo. Let me close that. Waymo did a really cool talk, and this is, again, about Gemini. So they experimented with using Gemini for self-driving cars. And surprisingly, the result was really, really good. They spent like a decade training custom models on how to do self-driving car, and they apparently just pumped a lot of videos through Gemini, and it came out with proper driving instructions. That's really, really cool. Somebody hacked 16 AI agents from the last YC batch. And the result was really disruptive. I think at some point he was able to gain access to the entire company's code base just by chatting with the agent. So security, if you're building AI agents, you must think about it. Container use was open source on stage during a keynote that was really awesome. It was a very, very good demo. And it allows agents to execute tasks in parallel. So really cool, check it out. And I'm going to pass it over to Pesh.
All right.
Take that away from me.
Hello?
Okay.
As Ryan mentioned, I was very focused on evals in this conference. I probably went to 5 or 6 talks on that track, and there was a lot of good material there. For me, Magoosh is a relatively established company in its space, and we're doing a lot of AI feature development. So just figuring out how we maintain a certain quality bar with the features that are coming out has been very top of mind. And so was really interesting to hear from a number of companies. So this was Notion, Google, OpenAI, Vercel, Zapier. Engineering teams on all those companies went through how they do evals, and there were definitely a lot of details that were different, but I would say the core of what they're all doing is pretty similar, and so I'm trying to represent it here with this flywheel, which I'm sure we all love flywheels. So first, I guess, what happens, like how do you do feature development when you don't have evals? You have an input into your feature, and then you have an output, and generally you're just going off vibes, right? You're just looking at it and being like, this seems pretty good. You might try a few different examples, and then you ship. And a lot of feature development happens this way. We even have some features that I would say are pretty much this at Magoosh. But what evals let you do is get a lot more structured and quantifiable with how you do your output evaluation. And what most of these companies are doing is using a scoring system. So they will take a feature and decompose it into a number of attributes or characteristics you want from the output. And you break that down into all those different signals and build it up into a single score. So for example, Google, for its search results, has over 300 signals it uses. So you can imagine it might look at things like, how long does it take for the page to load? How good is the design? What kind of backlinks? Who's linking to this? So they've come up with all these different signals of the quality of it, and they aggregate it into a score. So generally, when you're doing this with AI, you need to think through what are those specific signals, and for each one, you build an LLM judge to evaluate on that particular characteristic. And so each of those, think of them as just like its own prompt that either puts out a pass or a fail for that given attribute. And generally what you want to do is have a human go through and create a sample data set for that characteristic. So they'll hand grade and come up with like, okay, here's good design, pass or fail for a given page, let's say. And then you're trying to get your prompt to as closely match the human evals as possible. So maybe you're like, okay, it's 70% matches human or not. And like that's a good LLM judge now for that characteristic. And then you do a weighted sum across all those signals to get to your score. So once you have that, you want to get more systematic with your inputs. So you have data sets of, let's say, 10, 50, 100 example inputs that you want to run against. And now you've established your loop. So now once you have this, you can do tweaks to your AI feature. Maybe change the model, change the prompt, do fine tuning, whatever thing you want to do. And then you run the loop with those inputs, you get your scores, and you're basically going through that to see how you maximize your scores. So that all happens offline, and that's like the main loop. But the other thing I saw was how companies use production data. So you ultimately take your feature to production, and you get input from there to drive the flywheel. So there's a couple things there. So one is you are running the evals on the live data and getting scores. This gives you a kind of a heartbeat on how the feature's doing. If there's a regression, you're detecting it there. And then if you have kind of anomalies, there's a couple things there. So one is if you have a low score, it might be an edge case you hadn't thought about. So now adopt that into your offline data set. So you're like, okay, take that, put it in the data set. Now you're going to build against it. Another thing that could happen is you're going to get new signals that you didn't have when you were building offline. So for example, you might have like a thumbs up, thumbs down that the user is giving you. You might have a thumbs down when your eval is actually really high, your score is high. So you might realize that your eval is incomplete. There's something that you haven't captured. And so using that specific example, you might go add to your signals and have a new one that you build up. So that's essentially the flywheel. And I think the big thing beyond conceptually getting this is that you need to do it as quickly as possible. And so there's a lot of tooling and different ways to go about making this really frictionless. So that's us. not. Yeah, it was all brain trust. I was on a call with him this morning too.
All right.
Use open. It's open source.
Okay, so yeah, if you don't know me, I'm Anand. I'm running OmniVista. It's a easiest way to get a voice agent on your website. That'll be relevant because I'm going to talk about voice later. First of all, speed. So one of the big takeaways, and a lot of these are just from all of the talks that I went to. I just kind of organized it based on topics like this. So speed was one of them that came up a lot. Your moat is measured in weeks, not years. Basically, the moat gap used to be, quite a bit more, especially if you're building something technical, and obviously that's no longer the case. That's good and bad news. It means like if you build something really technical and you're like, wow, this is awesome, probably some, college student is developing the same thing at the same time, and that's bad news for you. But the good news is that you can then develop something new, and it's just a game of catch up. How to get over that is something I'll talk later about in the presentation. After that, I think competition is everywhere and is growing. One of the important takeaways from that one talk was you should really find a seam where you can enter from. Obviously, we all know about the wedge that you want to find. And I think the really good example that was given was granola. So obviously, granola came in. There's tons of incumbents in the meeting note space, but how do they survive and now thrive? Basically, what they were able to do is pick up on the very specific pain points of I want to have my notes auto merge with the notes of the meeting right after, or I want to not have to add an agent to every single call that I'm on. And those very few changes or very few differences is what allow them to basically enter a super crowded market and still win. So again, that's good news because there's obviously lots of products we're seeing popping up at the same time, but you shouldn't really be disheartened, or at least I'm taking it as a positive where it's okay to just build something even if it's similar to what you've seen. All right, obviously, back to voice AI. Here are some of the major things I took away from it. Obviously, I believe voice is going to be a very important part of the future of products. But interruptibility is, I think, the big next topic to think about. So obviously, this applies to voice, where how do you get the agent to respond in a timely and appropriate manner? If you've tried out voice, you know what I'm getting at. And it's not solved at all, and it probably will be a mix of infrastructure-related problems. Also, if you're trying to be a voice company, you might want to build it up from the ground up using something like LiveKit, which was one of the sponsors, I think, or Pipecat, or Daily, or whatever company runs that repo, versus using an API endpoint for it. WebRTC is built for that real-time interaction, so use that over WebSockets, even though a lot of the companies offer both. But literally, the person who made the WebRTC integration at OpenAI said, use WebRTC. Maybe he's biased. But another way to think about it is that it'll unlock new ways of working, interacting, playing. Obviously, I'm thinking of it from the perspective of you can now talk and have something happening on the screen at the same time, and you can interact with that at the same time as the agent, which is just not as possible with a very turn-based text interaction. Even though voice is still turn-based, it just seems a little bit more fluid. And also, somebody gave a cool demo with adding a voice to their children's toys. I thought that was kind of cool. So the future of toy tech is bright. All right, so design and taste. As code becomes commoditized, taste is what becomes important. And I'm sure you've heard that in various talks. This was definitely emphasized at some of the presentations I went to. So the chat box, or this blank box that you approach, is definitely not the final iteration of AI interfaces. And it definitely shouldn't be, because it's appropriate in many cases. One good argument made for it was that it's actually the easiest way to have a universal connector. You can now put in text or image or video or whatever. It's like a submission box, and you get the output of the model, which is usually text, image, video, or whatever it'll be. So it's actually great for how we are developing models and how we're presenting models to people. But of course, if you're building a product, like Breadcrumb, it doesn't need just a text box. It's also generating something that the user is able to see, like a dashboard, right? Yep. Yeah, just making sure I got the product right. Good design skills are needed. So I'm actually planning to spend some of my time now learning about actual design principles, not just vibe designing or like this is cool, but learning these skills as an engineer is going to be useful because as engineers are able to produce more and more things, we don't want it to all look all the same. If you're using V0, all of the websites look the same. They all have a gradient, obviously. That's not great. Because if they all look the same, then there's nothing special about it. So yeah, the final thing is you don't want to select models. So thinking about like how to do auto selection will be important. Looks like I didn't finish my thought there. But I'm actually getting cut off of time, so that's actually a real representation of what's happening here. Anyway, I made an MCP model router, so if you want to try that out, let me know, because I followed up on this. Anyway, it's somebody else's turn. Goose AI was not a sponsor, but it was mentioned quite a bit. Who's next?
Who's next? Any of you guys? Ishan?
Okay. Is this the magnetic?
No, you just.
Oh yeah, you've got the magnet.
But yeah, you can open up also. But
I find the magnet easier. Okay.
nice.
Can you do me a favor? Can you?
What time is now?
Yeah.
Oh, you want to take a picture? Sure.
No, I just want. Oh, you can take a picture too. I just need the timer, just to know how I'm doing on time. Okay, is this going? Oh, there we go. Oh no, formatting. Okay. Is it possible to go to the original? Maybe we'll just go through it. It looks good like that. Okay. Thank you, says my design skills. Okay, full disclosure, I am not an unbiased source. I was a speaker at the conference this year, so I'm a huge fan. I'm a fan of the podcast. But speaking of the conference, it is big, as folks have already covered. 3 days, 18 tracks, 150 sessions. You cannot take it all in. Do not try, you will be exhausted. First, what hasn't changed? Execution, we've already heard, matters. My spicy take is, if execution is a moat, then there are no moats. That's drawbridges everywhere. It's always been the case. The illustrative example for me was from the Conviction talk, and it was Cursor, right? They didn't invent the model. They didn't invent the surface area. They didn't invent code completion. They just out-executed everybody. We only hear about Cursor, but there were others who tried. Another thing that hasn't changed, reach and distribution still matter. So there were no new channels of distribution. So even tiny team Olive, right, they're doing social media. We've seen product-related growth, but it's not like we're seeing any new distribution mechanisms. So like agent to agent or like MCP as a distribution mechanism seems nascent. If somebody has found a case that's otherwise, please let me know. I'm really curious. But that's an interesting lesson. There was also no MCP moment. So the same organizers run a summit in February earlier this year. It was like the MCP zeitgeist tipping point. We didn't have a moment like that unless I missed it. So please let me know. I put a tweet this morning to see if there was, and I haven't got any hits yet. Okay, interesting observations. So I'm calling these social data networks. We are used to network effects where the tool gets more useful as more people come onto it. Classic social network. That's a communication thing. But the functionality did not change. The functionality of Facebook did not get better as more people got onto the network. What's happening with these data flywheels is the users using the product are pushing the boundaries of what the model and the product is capable of. And so not only is the product getting more useful because there's more people on the platform, but it's actually making the raw product better. As a result, the sources of IP are things that capture that. That's why evals and prompts are so important, because they're part of that iteration loop. And so prompts are kind of the new patents. We need to treat them like we treat code. And they're a key ingredient. I like this analogy again from Convection, the thick wrapper recipe. Also great on this point was the everything is a spec talk on the second day. How am I doing on time? There we go. OK, so software is content, like memes, like jokes, like blog posts. So my experience was, on the first day, of the workshop, I couldn't decide what workshop to go to. And so I just decided, let me dump some descriptions in ChatGPT and ask it to decide. Then I did it for the next one, and I just kept doing it. So by the second day, I was like, let me just vibe code this. And I posted it as a tool. The AI Daily Brief even included it in their coverage of the conference. And what's interesting is this was not like an amazingly hard app to code. But if I had to spend the same amount of time coding it by hand without AI, I just wouldn't have got around to it. And so one consequence of vibe coding and being able to create this stuff is, software is now more of a commodity. And one end result is that, media companies should be looking at software as a form of content, just like they look at blogs. So your local newspaper, like TechCrunch, GeekWire, they should be actually putting code out that illustrates this. Like, he thought this was interesting because it illustrated his point. You would have used a meme or a photo from the conference in the same kind of context. SF is so back, and everywhere all at once. So it's clear, as somebody who used to live there, and I periodically go back to San Francisco, it's got its energy again, it's got its mojo, and it's got a serendipity that creates collective momentum. There's so many times I was at a conversation where I talked to another guest, and they were like, I couldn't have had this conversation back home where I was. And I think our mission here, and what I really like about Foundations, is to capture that serendipity, that slice of San Francisco, and bring that here. That's one of the reasons I really like Foundations. I've said that to me, when I come here, I feel like I'm back in San Francisco. And that's it. The talk was amazing. Sorry, the conference was amazing. I cannot believe all the work that probably went into it. So a big shout out and thanks to the organizers. That's it.
All right, what is the magnet? Oh, there's the magnet. There you go. Relatively easy to use. Who's next? Ooh, I stole it from Pej. That's how we felt when we were there. Okay, my talk would be what I call a vibe conferencing. So I don't have any specific technical takeaways, but I think I was just wanted to test, specifically for what I'm doing in the space I'm in. I just wanted to understand how people are thinking about AI and building companies. And I have a couple of big takeaways. I think most of them have been covered here, voice and software engineering. But I think I want to touch down also more on Seattle versus Bay Area, and also how can we make Foundations a better place. So developer tooling, it's my first time there. Obviously, everyone's talking about MCP. So MCP is a thing everywhere. So people talking about MCP, agent to agent. So there's economy around MCP. So there's a lot of stuff. And if you're not using MCP in your workflows, and I actually did a funny thing. I did a workshop while we're not allowed to go to the official workshops. And I was doing the vibe marketing workshop, which I'm probably going to teach here. But it was funny just to using all of those tools. So coding, one of the interesting things, obviously, Claude Code became one of the biggest things in the past couple of weeks, and I think it changed the mindset from hey, you need to have an agent inside of IDE into moving this into terminal, which means that it becomes more of a headless thing. And there was a bunch of people trying really wild ideas, which I liked. So putting this Claude Code into Kubernetes and launching a ton of swarm of agents that are trying to code all different features and compete with each other. So I think we will probably in the next 6 months, my projection is I'm going to see a lot of this happening in the cloud, and we're going to see a lot of this orchestration happening, tools around orchestration of agents in the cloud that probably burn thousands of dollars per day and potentially produce a lot of value. And another thing, because it was a developer conference, all the tools, developer tooling is so much more advanced than even 6 months ago. But I feel still like there's a lot of tooling that could be applied to enterprise, which I'm personally excited about. But I think developer tooling moving really, really fast, and there's a lot of interesting techniques similar to swarms of agents, which I think are relatively still unknown to the enterprise and automation. And I think the voice, probably one of the things I was actually doing a little experiment. I was asking people how they use voice in their day-to-day work, and most of the developers, obviously, and I think it's almost a 50-50 split. People either are obsessed using Super Whisper or Aqua, and they just talk to Claude all the time, or people very much against that. They think that they need to think about when they put something in writing, so that helps them to build this thinking process. So It is for the 50% of the people out there, developers. I think voice is the future. I think we're going to see a lot of new interesting tooling around that and how it's being integrated. So I'm imagining that's being more about like passive, ambient AI that actually you can interact with through your daily workflows while coding. Lots of quality models, obviously a lot of infrastructure built, and I think it's getting very, very mature. And I think I mentioned that there was an interesting use case. Someone pointed out that they built a toy, like a non-technical person built, vibe-coded essentially a toy with a Raspberry Pi and a voice agent that teaches her kid to speak Mandarin in English. So it was interesting to see like those types of applications and hacking, even from non-technical folks, and how they use voice. The toy industry is probably going to be pretty big in there. And yeah, I think the last thing I want to touch on, which actually came up a lot in the conversation in this patio back in the house. Actually, one of the best things I think was the actual foundations offsite. That's how I'm thinking about that. There's a lot of interesting ideas from the conference itself, but also discussions how people think about the Bay Area. Most of the people were there actually lived in the Bay Area, so it was interesting to also see the comparison. And I think someone pointed out that was not my original idea, but I think, yeah. So I think the problem with Seattle is that on the bell curve, we're kind of in the middle. We're very low risk, and we're trying to go into the places with low competition. And I think in the Bay Area, what we see is there is a lot more crazy ideas. Even just my small sample, just talked to two friends while I was there, and then one of them was building something 6 months ago, which I thought was incredibly stupid. It's a very horizontal tool, and I just talked to them. They just launched a product 4 months ago. They're already doing $450K in ARR, have like 3 million in bookings. And I'm changing my opinion about things and how things are evolving. So, which kind of like that's the reflection on that. So I'm not probably going to go through this, but I think the idea there is like a lot more younger people that are not less risk averse, and then they are also surrounded by people that are taking bigger risks. In general, also like VC ecosystem is much more diverse from like the risk-taking perspective. So there's a lot more B2C. There's a lot more hard tech. So I think the Seattle ecosystem here is a little bit more B2B focused and very vertical focused, which I think kind of like narrows down the selection choice for a founder to become founder. And then one other thing someone said that I think Joey mentioned that every founder is a CTO here, and I think Bay Area probably has more of like the marketing sales people. One of the biggest things I want to say, how can we make foundations better? And again, you can argue with me about that. It's a kind of like a bold statement here, but I think we're lacking a bold vision here in most of the companies, myself included. Accountability came up a lot. So we're not pressuring each other on what we did this last week, like how we're moving forward, like what do we do? And seeing people's successes publicly also like helps a lot. So bragging more, whatever you build in, just talk to everyone that lists in Foundation Slack and post on social media, just like scream about that. And one of the probably other things for me personally was just ignore competition. I think that's kind of like the framing that stops us from taking on the really bold ideas with big vision. Maybe that's going to be super competitive eventually, but there's also an asymmetric upside of just taking on this crazy ideas in competitive spaces and winning those, like Cursor or Granola, and then there's been a lot of examples here. That's it. Thank you.
You've got a different mic. Okay.
Wow.
Both mics. Everyone's just recording everything these days. Ambient AI, right? That was a topic.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's that?
So,
yeah, exactly.
Patrick, you have some slides, right?
Yeah.
Or do you want to?
Oh, grab them.
Because I didn't actually. There were the Google outage distracted.
If you scroll down. Is this? Oh, here it is.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
There we go.
Nice.
Okay. Sweet. Bye for Sunny. Yeah, it is funny just the amount of granola recording that was happening. So I feel like I'm trying to embody that to give you guys a sampling here. Well, hey everybody. I'm Patrick Ellis. Thank you. And One thing that just kind of framed the conference, there were about 3,000 engineers there, or AI engineers, founders, other types of folks. And we had, I think, 224 talks in total. So it was a lot. Obviously, there were like 10 running at the same time for the most part. So we're doing our best to give a summary. But one quick kind of tip for conferences and everything I've found is basically scraping the website for all the information about the talks and the general categories, and then using Gemini along with all the granola notes that I recorded from all the talks, my manual notes, and then like other key takeaways to help kind of form and like pull out ideas. I feel like that really helps frame things. And then you can also use that to help shape further exploration or apply those ideas to your startup and like your current roadmap, which has been really helpful. But yeah, the first of the 4 themes I wanted to highlight is that context is everything, and it's your new IP or intellectual property. One of the most influential talks from my perspective was the very end talk by one of the OpenAI members. I've got it linked down below. I also have a QR code at the very end of these slides that will link you to the AI Engineer YouTube channel. And they've got all the content, or eventually will, they don't yet, from the conference that will be posted there. So if you're interested in any of these topics, going there, sorting by popularity, and searching can be really helpful. But yeah, so the spec is everything. The analogy was to a binary, where you have your source code and you compile that into a binary. That's essentially what OpenAI and others are kind of thinking about in terms of all the context, the business processes, the specific workflows, all the data that we put into shaping a great prompt is kind of like the source code now. And the output is a much more ephemeral. We're kind of vibe coding in some cases these different products that come out of that process. So really heavily investing in the process and the actual prompts and the MCPs and everything that feeds data in your organization to the software development lifecycle based around using LLMs to generate software is becoming critical, and really not just throwing away the prompts, which is kind of crazy if you think about it as source code, but having a way to manage and hydrate that with as much context as possible. One of the other things I wanted to highlight is just the importance of giving the LLMs context. Context is everything. One strategy is almost closing your eyes for 30 seconds and then kind of waking up and thinking, okay, if I was the LLM and I only had what the person just like gave me into this little box I'm in, could I do the task? And a lot of times it's pretty unreal how little context we're giving these LLMs. But if you have tools through an MCP, if you have a well-written prompt with a lot of context, access to the repo and the other services that the startup is using, and like, of course, your own roadmap and other product docs, so much more helpful. So just thinking about having empathy for the model and giving it what it needs to perform. Another one is MCP is everywhere. As you guys have all seen at Microsoft Build, native in Windows, Gemini, OpenAI, obviously Anthropic, everybody's adding support. And one of the coolest insights was the business-to-agent economy. In the future, if you're not discoverable by agents via MCP, most likely, or as an MCP, then you're not going to be a part of that environment, that economy. So being able to be LLM first in your design, for example, having markdown options, like one giant markdown file or an LLMs.txt file in your documentation is critical, in addition to having MCPs to allow the agents to kind of self-negotiate and find these tools. One idea in the startup is already doing this, I think I've got it here, yeah, is being able to actually make purchase decisions. And if you think about it, they're already aiding us, these agents, these LLMs, in making purchase decisions as we're researching and thinking about what vendors, what cloud software we want to use, what open source packages. But in the future, they'll probably literally be transacting and actually making like end-to-end those purchase decisions. So starting to expose ourselves to that method of distribution, the agent economy, through LLMs primarily, but also things such as having an LLMs.txt file, which is basically a sitemap, but for LLMs. And other things, Karpathy's quote I love from a tweet, LLMs don't like to click, they like to curl, is a really great one of, they're not using your UI UX like a human would. Of course, they're just curling using Bash or whatever tool to get the marked or the XML and HTML from your site. But it's way easier for them to understand and to not have all that distraction, being able to have just like a pure XML or Markdown file, for example. Carpathy actually had the idea of copying all docs to clipboard, which is really helpful. And then the last point here is thinking about your engineering team for not just people, not just humans, but also agents. Thinking about us as orchestrators. We're providing the context, we're providing the tooling, the environment for these LLMs, not just for engineering, but for business strategy, for marketing, for more and more of the parts of what we do day to day, especially as startups and lean teams, giving them access and creating an environment where they can thrive and have all the tooling that's needed is core to think about. I also have recommendations under each of these slides for ways to take action on these different topics. And then there's a GeekWire article with 11 takeaways we had from the conference, and then the AI YouTube engineer channel that I had mentioned earlier, which I'd highly recommend.
Let's get that chill look on your
Thanks.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thanks, Josh. You got it. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Hello. I think this will work. I guess we won't find out until I put on my lapel.
Yeah, you can just put it on.
Okay. So I think a lot of people already covered a lot of very interesting topics, and so here for me, this was huge. I don't post on Twitter very often. I get maybe 2 or 3 likes about stupid stuff I post, and then I randomly posted this after the conference, and random people, the head of AI at Databricks, they all resonated with this. It was super weird. And but what inspired this tweet, I think, was stealing from Pej's post earlier, was I went into this conference feeling like my eval story is pretty crappy right now. We totally need to have better sets of evals in some way, and I want to understand the current state of evals. It was great because there are all these evals vendors, but also it was terrible because there are all these evals vendors. And it became clear that they were all moving. It seemed like everyone there was moving towards this realization that we need to there's this flywheel that gives you the speed, that gives you the moat, right? And so that flywheel is this is counting up. Oh yeah, time's counting up. And I went and asked a bunch of people at a bunch of the different evals providers what they're doing to take the feedbacks that users would provide and then plumb that back in so that your engineering team can improve the prompts and therefore improve the products. And surprisingly, they were all saying that it's still it's on their roadmap. They haven't actually come out with prompt optimization stuff. That all seemed like it was kind of frontier and it's coming in in a few months. Which I thought was so interesting when we're also realizing from this talk from the OpenAI, which I thought was really good, that prompts are ephemeral, and the prompts are just this compiled artifact, right, based on your eval set, the information that you've collected from your users. And so it sort of seems why isn't there more of a it was just kind of surprising to me to see that the evals platforms were not there at this point to help with this process. So yeah, I think that this flywheel is kind of incomplete right now, but I thought it was pretty remarkable how often the evals platform engineers, when I talked to them, would say, as soon as I asked oh, what are you doing to optimize prompts automatically? They would say it's on our roadmap, followed by, hey, have you heard of DSPy? Which I thought was really funny because in my head, I don't know, I didn't really know what DSPy was. It just sort of seemed like a weird academic thing, optimizing prompts, compiling prompts. It didn't really make sense to me. But I think this conference is when it clicks that this philosophy that the DSPy people had from the very beginning back in 2023 or whatever, which is ages ago in AI years. We're right all along that we're kind of moving towards this world where, yeah, there's some DSPy diagram I found 2 seconds ago, but we're moving towards this world where we're compiling prompts, we're collecting evals, and then creating the implementation more and more automatically, right? So I thought that was very interesting. Also, this is what I was originally going to talk about, which is just links to workshops. They had a day on Tuesday where I think you have to pay extra to get in or something, but there were a bunch of different workshops. Some of them were more interesting than others. I should have included a link here so I can go actually look at it and bring it up. But this just goes to a Google Doc that has more links inside of it to the different workshops and like a little bit of notes about what those workshops are.
I'm sharing a link, by the way, if you can accept that.
Oh, sweet. Oh. So I got the sense that Brain Trust is like the big eval company. They were sponsoring a bunch of the talks. They brought in someone from Notion's AI program who I was wondering why it was like, oh, Notion AI, featuring the Notion AI person. And then it was like, oh, the Notion AI people were using Brain Trust. And so it had a lot of positive things to say. But if you want to try using, looking at the current, what a big eval platform looks like, that's a good place to start. I thought PyLabs was super interesting. I think the best way to describe it would be to go back to Pej's diagram, the part that's behind this window. They kind of help you automatically create all of these signals, which is super interesting. And their perspective was interesting because they're coming from Google and they're arguing that these stochastic systems, building reliable stochastic systems is not a new thing. It's older than LLMs. The AI engineering with Gemini 2.5, I think that's only really interesting if you've never really, if you want a way to learn how to call LLM APIs. Oh, time's up. Okay, cool, yes. And also maybe there might be t-shirts still in stock if you go to this MCP shop. It was free, it was pretty cool.
Matt, do you want to share anything at all? Oh.
You can do
Oh, Ash?
Okay. We've got two more, right?
Oh, he has his own microphone too. Wow.
I don't know. Oh, there's another mic? There's 3 mics? Oh, shit. Dang.
You just click on that. Yeah.
That's crazy. Anybody else got other mics? 7 mics? I don't have slides, but I have a video because I'm here for the vibes. Oh, really? Sorry, sorry, what is the... I'm looking at your Slack, I'm sorry, man. All right, here we go. Okay. All right, so I'm just gonna show videos of people brushing their teeth, I supposedly. Is the volume on? Is it on? Okay, anyway, so actually the best part of this entire experience was, maybe it's working, maybe there's no audio.
I hear the sound on that.
Okay, so then it's probably fine. Okay, sorry, you can turn it down a little bit.
I was just coming out to shoot some Get Ready with me.
All right. I don't know why there's audio on some of this, but not. Okay, so the best part of this entire trip was really hanging out with these folks, and I'm not just saying that because they're here, but it was awesome to stay in an Airbnb with a group of folks from here because you felt like you had this sort of little landing party at this entire large conference of 3,000 people. This was really interesting for me because it was it was a chance to go back to San Francisco. I've been in San Francisco for 5-6 years, and then got a chance to kind of come back and see all of the interesting things. I hadn't actually ridden in a Waymo, believe it or not. Got a chance to spend some time in the ferry building, some of my favorite places and things like that. I was hoping that Bilal might be here, but no.
What are you most excited about? Honestly, is meeting people like this. The talks, I could watch them on YouTube. It's true. It's here for the people. It's here for the people. Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome.
I do have content in here too. So here's interesting talks between us internally. We were just talking about all the interesting things that we were going to see in tracks and things like that. So I'm actually gonna share this on LinkedIn as well. Here's Matt talking about. I'm not gonna play all of this because you guys literally just talked a second ago. But yeah, here's an opportunity for you to at least see what the vibe was like. I think the vibe was actually very important at this conference. The Wi-Fi was absolutely terrible. It was atrocious. But the energy, I go to conferences, tech conferences a lot. I go to tech conferences and now increasingly fintech conferences because that's my space and what I spend a lot of time doing. But the vibe and the energy around this particular conference, I think, was much greater than many of the other events that I have been to lately. I've been to SaaStr for 4 or 5 years in a row. SaaStr is interestingly down a lot. The energy is down there. But the energy here and the vibe here is amazing. And you'll see, I think the real winner of this entire conference sponsorship series is right here, Tambo, because he had his stuff posted all over. I wanted to share some really interesting not weird, but like some slides that I thought were, that I took photos of, and they were kind of random, I know, but I took I took things that I thought were actually really interesting. Azure had this presentation, and it was mostly just presenting Azure, and here's all the awesome things we're doing and things like that. But there's a few things that I thought were really cool UI patterns, and I'm always constantly looking for UI patterns, UX patterns that are really like changing in this world, right? And I think it's because we live in this duality, this weird duality, right? You mentioned the Bhoopathy quote before. I thought that resonated with me because there's so many fucking people spending time on agents and like agents to do this and agents to do that. But at the end of the day, it's just like you emulating a human being going around and clicking on different things. Well, it's like, well, if you had the intention or if you knew exactly what you wanted to accomplish in that product, why the hell wouldn't you just do it? Why the hell wouldn't you just use a curl? But then the other part of this duality that I think is really interesting is that at the end of the day, what needs to be done? It's something for a human being. And I think the interface between the human being and what needs to be done, not necessarily the interface of like the product, but it's like the interface between the human being and what needs to be done needs to be fleshed out. And we could be doing so much better than we're doing right now. That's what actually really gets me excited about this conference, and specifically the design and product tracks, is that imagine going to UIs, going to interfaces, where like it kind of already knows exactly what you want. And I think that some interfaces are starting to emulate it and starting to nail it. Here's a stupid small example, but in this case, you'll see that Azure showed exactly in this thread, here's the user. So this is like, you can do this obviously, and like Chippity and Claude and things like that. You can say, hey, here's who I am, assume that I'm this person, so on and so forth. But in their products, they're starting to put the user up at the top. So this is the user, and then this is like everything so it's like it's loading the context of the user, which is, as we know, is a really good mental frame to start establishing like a good pattern. I'm gonna keep going here. So last year's Models of Commodity, this was the Cognition talk. And this was interesting because I saw that Gemini was way bigger than I previously thought on open router standards. She talked a lot about Cursor for X. And Cursor is obviously huge. It's growing really fast. I'm already 5. Well, OK. All right, I'm just going to go through these really quick. But it's how many different verticals can we really go and address things like Cursor? All right, I'm just going to. I think everybody talked about the Pelican. If not, then Matt, you should talk about the Pelican. This was interesting. A little voice device. I think people should just check this out. I will link to these on my LinkedIn at some point or something. But this was interesting because voice and voice interactions. I agree with Anand. There's like huge opportunities in the space, and I just was here for it. Yeah, I guess my big takeaway for everybody here, obviously I would say this, is that this is a guy who shipped a shit ton of side projects. I think like 50 or something in a year. Some of them have over 1 million users, side projects. And he just, basically says, just keep shipping, ship as much as you can. Execution is the moat. You've heard it here before. And you have to ship really quickly. So it's all about speed. And then you guys talked enough about eval, so I'm not going to go into this. But I will share this in the foundation slide. So thank you very much.
2 mics. Do we?
Oh.
Yeah.
what you want. All right, which model am I talking to with this one? Okay, 90 seconds or so. I don't have slides. I vibe attended as more of a product design person, and it worked out pretty well because there were surprise. I went to challenge my own conventional wisdom around like what don't I know and what's going on out there. And MCP, super awesome. Still can't order a T-shirt, but maybe it worked for somebody else. Give it a try. Actually, that was a pretty cool link. But so the sense was that there's a hell of a lot going on. Yes, speed matters. I'm just going to echo. I think it was Anand's slide that was taste is differentiating. Quality and attention to detail are really going to be highlighted more than ever. I have a personal theory that there's a renaissance coming for the liberal arts. If you're an anthropologist or somebody who can think deeply about a context and a human activity and write well about it, congratulations, you're writing a spec. You're now somebody who could be as valuable to a tech team as the 100x engineer or whomever. So I'm glad that prompting is getting its due. So I thought that was pretty awesome. So that's my taste and quality point. I only have 2 other random points. One is, if you want free shit, go to the expo. I got a whole bunch of credits for a whole bunch of different services that I'm going to give to my students at my UW class for design next year for Gamma, the great presentation and a generative media app, and got some others from 11 Labs and a third one I can't remember right now. But hey, free stuff that credits you can run with for any purpose is a great reason to go to a conference. And finally, on voice, I think I was surprised by how big a deal voice was. I'm totally not a voice coder or voice whatever, but maybe I should become one. But where I find voice relevant is in air traffic control, because I am a pilot, and there's all sorts of problems with air traffic control right now with the implementation of the next gen initiative, which has been going on for, 15 years now and beyond. And I asked Claude to do a deep research on what's the current thing AI-wise in ATC, and I'll post the report. I thought it was super interesting for people that think aviation is interesting. And yeah, Ryan and I were talking about this, but basically there may be a role for generative AI and for voice technology to take over parts of or manage the really boring parts that don't scale well so that emergencies can continue to be handled by proper humans. But there's also so much else going on where I had no idea AI even had a role in ATC right now. So that was, moral of the story was I found something to kind of geek out about there. Anyway, humans back in the loop, free stuff at conferences, and yeah, like I said, the product and design track was surprisingly robust, so I would definitely go back, and I would definitely encourage non-technical folks to go to these technical conferences, because guess what? Serendipity engines are awesome, and we've got one here, so let's keep going. All right, thanks, y'all.